us reckless, they call us wild, but we're the voice of the unheard child. For too long we've watched them steal and deceive. Now we march, cause in hope we believe. Locked up in chains, they try to make us fall, but we stand tall, we're answering the call. Persecuted, but we won't be tamed. For Muguland's freedom, our fire's inflamed. We are the children of anger, fighting for the truth. Born from love for our land, the fire of the youth. We stand unbowed, unbroken by the lights. With Muguland in our hearts, we rise, we rise. The streets are burning with the passion of the brave. No chains can hold us, no power can.
Episode 5, Children of Anger, The Agrarian Explosion by Ope Banwo. The spark that had ignited the agrarian movement was now spreading like wildfire across the entire nation. What had begun as a few passionate voices on social media had grown into a powerful nationwide movement that transcended traditional political boundaries. The agrarians were no longer just a group of disaffected youths. They had become a force to be reckoned with, shaking the very foundations of Muguland's political establishment. In the northern regions of Muguland, where political activity had long been dominated by entrenched elites, the rise of the agrarians took many by surprise. Traditionally conservative and resistant to change, the youth in these areas were galvanized by the message of transparency and justice that Paul Igwe represented. Small groups began to form in cities like Kahana, Kandana, and Maiduguri, where young people who had never before been involved in politics were now meeting in secret, plotting ways to support the movement. One such group, calling themselves Awosa Youth for Change, started as a handful of university students who'd been inspired by the speeches they had seen online. Without any formal structure or funding, they began organizing rallies and distributing flyers, urging their peers to join the movement. Their efforts were fueled by a deep-seated frustration with the status quo, and their numbers grew rapidly. In a makeshift office in Kano, Ahmed, the leader of the group, spoke passionately to his fellow organizers. "We don't need money from anyone to make this happen. The power is in our hands, and if we all chip in, we can make sure the Agrarians are heard loud and clear in the north. Let's show them that we're not just sheep waiting to be led. We're the future of this country." The group set up a GoFundMe page on Twitter, where they began raising money from supporters all over the region. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from students, young professionals, and even a few sympathetic elders who had grown tired of the corruption that had plagued Muguland for decades. The money was used to rent offices, print banners, and organize events. Within weeks, Awosa Youth for Change had established a network of cells across the northern states, each one operating independently but united in their support for Paul Igwe. In the southwestern part of Muguland, the movement took on a life of its own, driven by a group called Mugu Independence Matters. This group, made up of young professionals and activists, had been at the forefront of social justice causes for years. But the rise of the Agrarians gave them a new sense of purpose. The group's leader, Tade, was a lawyer by profession, but his passion lay in activism. He had been following Paul Igwe's career since his days as governor of Onitsha, and he saw in him a candidate who could finally bring the change that Muguland needed. Tade and his team didn't wait for instructions or funding from Paul. They took matters into their own hands. "Paul Igwe isn't just a candidate, he's a symbol of what we can achieve if we come together," Tade told his team during a strategy meeting. "We're not waiting for anyone to save us. We're going to build this movement ourselves." Mugu Independence Matters began by pooling their resources to rent and equip offices across 5 states in the southwest. They bought t-shirts, caps, and other campaign materials, which they distributed to their members, but they didn't stop there. The group also donated 8 buildings to the movement, turning them into community hubs where people could come together, organize, and plan their next steps. The group's efforts attracted hundreds of new members, many of whom had never been involved in politics before. They formed over 100 cell groups, each one operating independently but connected by a shared goal. The movement spread like wildfire through towns and cities, drawing in people from all walks of life who were eager to be part of something bigger than themselves. In the eastern regions of Muguland, where Paul Igwe's influence was already strong due to his roots in Onitsha, the movement exploded with an intensity that caught even the most seasoned politicians off guard. The youth, who had long been disenfranchised by a system that seemed designed to exclude them, saw in Paul a leader who could finally represent their interests. One of the most active groups in the East was Okopob for Igwe, a grassroots organization that sprang up almost overnight. Led by Nkem, a fiery young entrepreneur, the group quickly became known for its bold and innovative strategies. Nkem, who had built a successful business from the ground up, applied the same entrepreneurial spirit to the movement, organizing fundraisers, rallies, and community outreach programs. Paul Igwe is one of us, Nkem would often say at their meetings. He understands what it means to struggle, to fight for what's right. We're not waiting for him to tell us what to do. We're going to make sure he has the support he needs to win this fight. The group's efforts were self-funded, with members contributing whatever they could. They organized fundraising dinners, sold merchandise, and even hosted online auctions to raise money for the movement. The funds were used to support their grassroots activities, from renting venues for rallies to printing campaign materials. The energy and enthusiasm were palpable, and it wasn't long before Okopob for Igwe had established a strong presence across the eastern states. But as the Igwerian movement grew, not all who joined were motivated by a desire for change. In both the north and the east, a few unscrupulous individuals saw the movement's popularity as an opportunity for personal gain. These criminally minded people began to exploit the frenzy surrounding Paul Igwe's candidacy, setting up fake fundraising campaigns and collecting donations from unsuspecting supporters, only to disappear with the money. In one instance, a group in the north called Unity for Change claimed to be raising funds for the movement, only for the organizers to vanish after collecting a significant amount of money. The same thing happened in parts of the East, where a couple of fake groups took advantage of the enthusiasm of the Igwerians, collecting donations under false pretenses. These incidents sent shockwaves through the movement, and for a time there was fear that they might undermine everything the Igwerians had worked for. But instead of tearing the movement apart, these betrayals only strengthened the resolve of the true supporters. They doubled down on their efforts to ensure that the movement remained transparent and accountable, setting up online platforms where donations could be tracked and verified. Bolu Yahaya, the tech guru, played a key role in this. He developed a secure online platform where genuine supporters could donate directly to verified groups, ensuring that their contributions were used for the movement and not siphoned off by criminals. "We're not going to let a few bad apples ruin this for everyone," Bolu said during an emergency online meeting with the core team. "This movement is too important. We'll make sure that every kobo goes to the right place, and that the Igwerians know exactly how their money is being used." As the Igwerians continued to grow, the ruling Agadongo party became increasingly alarmed. They had never seen anything like this before, a movement that was not only self-funded but also decentralized, with independent groups springing up all over the country. The fact that these groups were organizing themselves, raising their own funds, and operating without direct orders from Paul Igwe terrified the establishment. They realized that this was a movement they couldn't easily control or suppress. The politicians who had grown fat on corruption and the spoils of power began to plot ways to undermine the Igwerians from within. They planted informants within the groups, spread rumors to sow discord, and tried to co-opt some of the movement's leaders with offers of money and power. But the Igwerians were not easily swayed. They had seen too much, suffered too much, to be bought off by the same people they were fighting against. The ruling party's efforts to destroy the movement only fueled the Igwerians' resolve. They knew that they were on the right path, and that the fear of the establishment was a sign that they were making progress. The more the Agadongo party tried to stop them, the more determined they became to see their mission through to the end. The growth of the Iguarians was nothing short of organized chaos. Groups across the country operated independently, each with its own leadership and strategies, yet all were united in their support for Paul Igwe and their desire for change. This decentralized structure, while chaotic, was also the movement's greatest strength. It made it impossible for the ruling party to target any single leader or group, as the movement was too spread out, too diverse and too resilient. For the first time in Muguland's history, a political movement was being funded and driven by the people themselves without any need for handouts or direction from the candidate they supported. The Iguarians had become a living, breathing force, driven by hope, anger, and an unshakable belief in the possibility of a better future. As the movement continued to grow, the ruling party's fear turned to desperation. They had underestimated the power of the people, and now they were scrambling to find a way to stop the tide that was rising against them. But the Iguarians were unstoppable. They were the voice of a new generation, a generation that was tired of waiting for change and was ready to make it happen on their own terms. And as they marched forward, their numbers growing with each passing day, they knew that they were on the cusp of something truly historic. The Iguarian explosion had begun, and there was no turning back.
The Iguarian movement had grown too powerful to be ignored, and the ruling elites of Muguland were growing increasingly desperate. The movement's rapid expansion, its self-sufficiency, and its deep connection to the youth of the nation had shaken the foundations of the old guard. The Agadongo party, long accustomed to ruling unchallenged, now faced an opponent that was not only resilient, but seemingly unstoppable. Chief Bisola Eleniyan, a leading contender in the upcoming election, and a figure known for his ruthlessness, saw the writing on the wall. Nicknamed the Godfather, Chief Eleniyan had built his empire on a foundation of fear, loyalty, and an extensive network of loyalists, including street thugs who did his dirty work. He knew that if the Iguarians continued to gain momentum, his chances of securing the presidency would be severely threatened. Something had to be done, and it had to be done swiftly. The decision was made to target one of the movement's most visible and vocal leaders, Gabi Tollbearer. Gabi had become a household name after his involvement in the End Police protests, where his speeches and organizing efforts had inspired countless young people to join the cause. He was a natural target, a symbol of the movement's defiance and its determination to bring about change. The plan was simple: eliminate Gabi Tollbearer, and the movement would lose one of its most powerful voices. But Chief Eleniyan knew that simply arresting Segun wouldn't be enough. The charges needed to be serious, something that would not only discredit him, but also strike fear into the hearts of the Iguarians. It was a warm evening at Onidodo Beach, one of the few places where Gabi could escape the pressures of the movement and spend time with his wife and close friends. The beach was a popular spot in Alaye City, known for its serene views and relaxed atmosphere. On this night, Gabi was laughing, enjoying a rare moment of peace as the waves gently lapped at the shore. But unbeknownst to him, forces were at work to turn his world upside down. Morufu Ika, a notorious street enforcer and one of Chief Eleniyan's most trusted operatives, had been quietly observing Gabi for weeks. On Chief Eleniyan's orders, Morufu had planted firearms in the trunk of Gabi's car earlier that day, ensuring that the setup would be airtight. As Gabi and his friends began to pack up for the evening, a convoy of police vehicles suddenly pulled up, their sirens blaring. The beachgoers looked on in shock as the officers, armed to the teeth, surrounded Gabi and his group. "Mr. Gabi Tollbearer," one of the officers barked, stepping forward with a smirk. "You're under arrest for possession of illegal firearms." Gabi's face went pale as the accusations sank in. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of confusion and anger. "I don't own any guns." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he motioned for his men to search the car. Moments later, they emerged with the weapons that had been planted by Morufu, holding them up for everyone to see. "Explain this then," the officer sneered, holding up a rifle. Gabi's wife, Yewande, cried out in horror, clutching her husband's arm. "This is a setup! You know he didn't do this!" she screamed. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Gabi was handcuffed and roughly shoved into the back of one of the police vehicles. As they drove away, the officers made sure to parade him through the streets, making a public spectacle of his arrest. The message was clear: this was what happened to those who dared to challenge the powers that be. Gabby was taken to a police station in Alaye City, where he was thrown into a cell without any formal charges. The conditions were deplorable, filthy, overcrowded, and infested with rats. But the worst was yet to come. That night, as Gabby tried to make sense of what had happened, a group of thugs entered his cell. They were not ordinary prisoners, but men planted by Morufu Ika to deliver a message. Without warning, they began to beat Gabby mercilessly, their fists and boots raining down on him in a brutal assault. "You think you can take down Chief Eleniyan?" one of them hissed as he drove a fist into Gabby's ribs. "You think the Iguarians will save you? You're nothing!" By the time the beating was over, Gabby was left lying on the cold, dirty floor, barely conscious, his body covered in bruises and cuts. The pain was excruciating, but it was the realization that he was utterly alone, isolated from the movement he had fought so hard to build, that hurt the most. The following morning, Gabby was dragged out of his cell, barely able to stand. He was told that he would be arraigned on charges of illegal gun possession, charges that carried the death penalty under Muguland's draconian laws. The news sent shockwaves through the movement, and within hours the story of Gabby's arrest and the trumped-up charges spread like wildfire on social media. The Iguarians rally. As soon as the news broke, the Iguarians sprang into action. They had always known that the movement would face resistance from the ruling elites, but this was a direct attack on one of their own. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Twitter was flooded with the hashtag #FreeGabby as supporters demanded his release and denounced the charges as a blatant attempt to silence the movement. Within hours, a Twitter space was organized, where thousands of Iguarians gathered to discuss how they could help. "We need to act fast," said Bolu Yahaya, the tech guru, who had become one of the movement's key organizers. "This isn't just about Gabby. It's about all of us. If they can do this to him, they can do it to anyone." During the Twitter space, the Iguarians mobilized with a level of efficiency that left even their most ardent supporters in awe. Funds were raised in record time, over 5 million mugra in just a few hours, to cover Gabby's legal defense and ensure he had the best representation possible. 2 senior advocates of Muguland volunteered their services, and by nightfall, they were already at the police station, demanding to see their client. But the support didn't stop there. Iguarians from across the country began offering their services to keep Gabby's business running while he was incarcerated. From managing his social media accounts to handling logistics for his company, they stepped up in every way they could, determined to show that they would not abandon their own. "Gabby stood up for us," said Kemi, one of the movement's most vocal activists, during the Twitter space. "Now it's our turn to stand up for him. We're not going to let them break us." As the Iguarians continued to rally around Gabby, word of his plight reached the ears of Oba Orisa, one of the most respected traditional rulers in Alaye City. The Oba was known for his wisdom and fairness, and his influence extended far beyond his kingdom. He had remained neutral in the political machinations of Muguland, but the injustice of Gabby's arrest moved him to act. Oba Orisa made a series of discreet phone calls, leveraging his considerable connections to intervene on Gabby's behalf. The Oba's involvement sent shockwaves through the ruling elite, who knew better than to cross him. Within days, the charges against Gabby were quietly dropped, and he was released from custody. When Gabby emerged from the police station, he was a shadow of his former self. His face was swollen, his body covered in bruises and cuts, and he could barely walk. But despite the physical toll, his spirit remained unbroken. He had survived the worst that the ruling elites could throw at him, and he knew that the experience had only strengthened his resolve. As soon as Gabby was released, the Iguarians wasted no time in showing their support. Hundreds of messages flooded his phone, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. The movement's members organized a welcome home rally, where Gabby, despite his injuries, addressed the crowd. "They tried to break me," he said, his voice hoarse but defiant. "They tried to break all of us. But we're still here, and we're not going anywhere. The Iguarians will not be silenced. We will not be intimidated, and we will not stop fighting until we've won the future we deserve." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising in a chorus of support for the man who had become a symbol of their struggle. Gabby's ordeal had only served to strengthen the movement, uniting the Iguarians in their determination to see their mission through to the end. As Gabby stood before the crowd, battered but unbowed, it became clear that the ruling elites had made a grave miscalculation. Instead of breaking the movement, they had given it new life, new purpose. The Iguarians had shown that they were willing to stand up for their own, no matter the cost. and that they would not be deterred by fear or intimidation. The ruling elites had drawn blood, but the Iguarians had drawn something far more powerful: solidarity, unity, and an unbreakable spirit. Episode 7, the ruling elites, desperate to quash the growing influence of the Iguarians, realized that brute force alone would not be enough. The movement had proven resilient, with its members rallying together even in the face of arrests, brutality, and intimidation. It was time for a different strategy, one that would sow discord and discredit the movement from within. The elites decided to weaponize the fears and prejudices of Muguland's diverse population, turning the country's complex ethnic and political landscape against the Iguarians. The elite's first move was to tie the Iguarians to a figure who had long been a thorn in the government's side: Ogbonna Ibekwe. Ibekwe, a controversial and polarizing leader, had been advocating for the secession of the southeastern regions of Muguland to form a new country called Okorobia Nation. His rhetoric was incendiary, calling for cities to be burned and chaos to reign unless his demands were met. The Agodongo party had previously arrested Ibekwe on charges of treason, and he was currently awaiting trial. Seeing an opportunity to exploit the deep-seated fears of national disintegration, the government's counterattack unit began circulating stories on social media, particularly on Twitter and Facebook. These stories claimed that the Iguarians were secretly controlled by Ibekwe, and that Paul Igwe was nothing more than a puppet being used to further the Okorobian agenda. The narrative suggested that the true goal of the Iguarians was not to reform Muguland, but to tear it apart, leading to the secession of the southeastern states. Paul Igwe is just a front, read one widely shared post on Twitter. The real mastermind behind the Iguarians is Ogbonna Ibekwe. Don't be fooled. This is all part of a plan to break up Muguland and create Okorobia Nation. The tweets and posts were carefully crafted to tap into the fears of ordinary Mugulanders, particularly those in the central and northern regions, where the idea of secession was deeply unpopular. Within days, the narrative began to gain traction, with many people questioning the true intentions of the Iguarians. As the false narrative spread, it began to take on a dangerous ethnic dimension. The Yorubawas, one of the largest tribes in the western regions of Muguland, and the tribe of Chief Bisola Eleniyan, were particularly susceptible to the government's propaganda. The fear that the Iguarians were part of a secessionist plot played directly into long-standing tensions between the different ethnic groups in Muguland. Leaders within the Yorubawa community, many of whom were aligned with Chief Eleniyan, began to publicly denounce the Iguarians, accusing members of their own tribe who supported the movement of being traitors. The rhetoric quickly became incendiary, with high-profile figures using their platforms to stoke the flames of division. On CVT-TV, a major network controlled by Chief Eleniyan's allies, a popular talk show host ranted against the Iguarians during a primetime broadcast. "These so-called Iguarians are nothing but a tool of the Okorobians," he declared, pounding his fist on the table. "And any Yorubawa who supports them is a bastard. You're betraying your own people. This is a fight for our survival, and we cannot allow traitors in our midst." The broadcast had an immediate impact. Across the western states, tensions flared as supporters of the Iguarians found themselves ostracized and even attacked by their own communities. The division spread like a contagion, infecting even those who had previously been sympathetic to the movement. One of the most dramatic confrontations took place in Alaye City, where a group of Yorubawa youths confronted a pro-Iguarian rally. What began as a heated exchange of words quickly escalated into violence, with stones and bottles thrown, and several people injured. "Traitors!" the Yorubawa youths shouted as they charged at the Iguarians. "You're selling us out to the Okorobians!" The clash was captured on video and quickly went viral, further deepening the ethnic divide. The elites watched with satisfaction as the Iguarians' message of unity and reform was drowned out by the roar of tribalism and fear. The response: rallying the base. Despite the intense pressure, the Iguarians refused to back down. They knew that if they didn't act quickly, the movement could be torn apart by the lies and divisions being sown by the ruling elites. In a move of strategic brilliance, Bolu Adebayo, the tech guru, organized a massive Twitter space titled "The Real Truth About the Iguarians." The Twitter space was joined by thousands, including key figures from the movement, such as Paul Igwe himself, and members of the Iguarians from across the country. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a determination to set the record straight. Paul Igwe spoke directly to the accusations for the first time, his voice calm but firm. Let me be absolutely clear, the Iguerians have no connection to Ogbonna Ibekwe or any secessionist agenda. We are a movement for all Mugulanders, regardless of tribe or region. Our goal is to build a better Muguland for everyone, not to divide it. His words were met with widespread support, with thousands of listeners tweeting their agreement and solidarity. Kemi, one of the movement's youngest influencers but most vocal activists, with millions of followers on Twitter, also took the stage. The elites are terrified of us because they know we represent the will of the people. They're trying to divide us because that's the only way they can stop us. But we're smarter than that. We won't let them play us against each other. The Twitter space turned into a rallying cry for the Iguerians, as speakers from across the country shared stories of unity and resistance against the lies being spread by the government. They emphasized that the movement was about fighting for justice and accountability, not about dividing the nation. At the same time, Sunset Television, one of the few media outlets sympathetic to the Iguerians, aired a special program highlighting the movement's efforts to bridge ethnic divides and build a united front for change. The program featured interviews with Iguerians from different tribes, all of whom spoke passionately about their commitment to the movement's goals. "We're not going to let them tear us apart," said Adayora Okoye during her interview on Sunset Television. "The Iguerians are bigger than any one tribe or region. We're fighting for all of Muguland, and we're not going to let the elite's lies distract us from that." Counterattacks and escalation. Despite the best efforts of the Iguerians to counter the narrative, the divisions continued to grow. The smear campaign had done its job, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and fear that was difficult to dispel. The Yorubawa West and Awosa North regions, both critical in the upcoming elections, saw a significant drop in support for the Iguerians as tribal leaders urged their followers to distance themselves from the movement. However, the Iguerians were not without their victories. In the southeastern states, where the Okorobian narrative had initially caused some unease, the movement managed to reclaim much of its support by emphasizing its commitment to national unity and rejecting any association with Ogbonna Ibekwe. The elites, sensing that their efforts to divide the movement were only partially successful, began to plot their next move. The stakes were higher than ever, and the battle for the future of Muguland was only just beginning. A nation on edge. As the sun set on another tumultuous day in Muguland, it was clear that the country was on the brink. The ruling elites had drawn blood, but the Iguerians had not been defeated. The movement had shown that it could withstand even the most insidious attacks. But the cost had been high. The divisions that had been sown would not easily be healed, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. Yet, for all the fear and uncertainty, there was still hope. The Iguerians had proven that they were more than just a movement. They were a force that could not be easily silenced or broken. As they regrouped and prepared for the next phase of their struggle, they knew that the eyes of the nation were upon them. The battle for the soul of Muguland was far from over, and the Iguerians were ready to fight for their future, no matter the cost. The Iguerian movement had grown exponentially, drawing in supporters from all walks of life, and had begun to solidify as a powerful force in Muguland's political landscape. However, not everyone who had been part of the broader struggle for change was on board with the direction the Iguerians were taking. The tension between the Iguerians and the original organizers of the End Police movement, known as the OG End Police leaders, had been simmering for months. These tensions finally came to a head in a series of explosive confrontations, both online and in the public sphere. The End Police movement had originally been a grassroots effort to protest against police brutality, particularly the abuses committed by the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, known as SARS. The protests had united young people across Muguland, cutting across tribal and political lines. However, as the movement evolved, so too did its goals and leadership. The Iguerians, inspired by the momentum of the End Police protests, had channeled that energy into a broader political movement, rallying around Paul Igwe as a candidate for president. This shift didn't sit well with some of the original End Police organizers, who felt that the movement was being co-opted for partisan purposes. Elega Oloyinbo, a prominent voice during the End Police protests and a self-proclaimed Twitter warrior, had been one of the most vocal critics of the Iguerians. Known for his sharp tongue and unapologetic stance on social justice issues, Eleniyan believed that the Iguarians were betraying the original purpose of the End Police movement. During a heated Twitter space titled End Police vs. Iguarians: The Real Agenda, Eleniyan didn't hold back. The End Police movement was about fighting against police brutality and systemic oppression, Eleniyan declared, his voice crackling with intensity. It was never about electing politicians or aligning ourselves with any political party. The Iguarians have twisted our cause into something it was never meant to be, a political tool for their so-called revolution. Chief Bisola, another key figure in the original End Police protests, echoed Eleniyan's sentiments. The Iguarians are a mob, driven by a political agenda that has nothing to do with what we fought for, she said. They're turning our movement into a platform for partisan politics, and that's not what End Police was about. It's a betrayal, plain and simple. The accusation struck a nerve among the Iguarians, who had always prided themselves on being the inheritors of the End Police legacy. They saw themselves as the next evolution of the struggle, taking the fight from the streets to the highest levels of power. To them, the criticism from Eleniyan and Asiri was not only unfair but deeply hypocritical. The Iguarians were quick to respond, and the counterattack was brutal. Bolu Yahaya, the tech guru who had been instrumental in organizing the Iguarians' digital strategy, led the charge on Twitter. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines when you've sold out to the very people we're fighting against, Bolu tweeted, his words dripping with contempt. The OGs claim we're the ones politicizing the movement, but where were they when Chief Eleniyan started lining their pockets? Silence is complicity. The accusation sent shockwaves through the online community. Bolu and other Iguarians began digging into the past of some of the OG End Police leaders, unearthing evidence that suggested they had been receiving payments from various political figures, including top politicians like Chief Bisola Eleniyan, for social media services. To the Iguarians, this was nothing short of a betrayal. In a Twitter space organized by the Iguarians titled Exposing the Sellouts, the revelations were laid bare. Let's talk about the so-called leaders who have been bought off, Kemi, one of the movement's most vocal activists, said during the discussion. They were loud when it was convenient, but when the money started flowing, their voices went quiet. They accuse us of hijacking the movement, but they're the ones who sold it out. The Iguarians didn't just stop at Twitter, they took their message to the streets, organizing rallies where they called out the OG End Police leaders for what they saw as their hypocrisy and betrayal. Banners with slogans like, End Police was just the beginning and Iguarians for true change were waved defiantly as speakers urged the crowd to reject the attempts to divide them. The accusations of betrayal were further complicated by the ethnic tensions that had been simmering since the smear campaign linking the Iguarians to the Okorobian secessionist movement. The OG End Police leaders, many of whom were from the Yorubawa tribe, began framing the Iguarians as an Eastern agenda. Elega Oloyinbo was particularly vocal about this, using his platform to stir up tribal sentiments. The Iguarians are not about justice or change, he tweeted. They're about pushing an Eastern agenda, and they're using Paul Igwe as their frontman. Don't be fooled. This is tribalism, plain and simple. The rhetoric sparked a wave of backlash from Iguarians, who accused the OG End Police leaders of falling into the same tribal jingoism they had once condemned. You're the ones being tribalistic, Adora Okoye fired back in a televised debate on Sunset Television. You're using our different tribes to divide us, just like the elites want. This isn't about the East or the West or the North. This is about all of Muguland. If you can't see that, then maybe it's you who's lost sight of what we're fighting for. The debate quickly became a flashpoint for the broader conflict between the Iguarians and the OG End Police leaders. On Sunset Television, the hosts allowed the movement's leaders to make their case, giving airtime to their arguments that the OGs had lost their way and were now serving the interests of the very elites they once opposed. On the other side, CVT-TV, the network aligned with Chief Eleniyan, painted a very different picture. In a special segment titled The Truth Behind the Iguarians, the network echoed the accusations of the OG End Police leaders, framing the Iguarians as a dangerous tribalistic mob that had strayed far from the original goals of the End Police protests. These Iguarians are nothing but opportunists, one of the CVT-TV hosts declared. They've hijacked a noble cause and turned it into a political machine. And let's not forget who's pulling the strings, Ogbonna Ibekwe, the secessionist leader. This isn't about change, it's about power, and they'll destroy Muguland to get it. The segment was widely shared and debated, further polarizing the country and deepening the rift between the Iguarians and the OG police leaders. The fallout from the conflict was immediate and intense. The OG police leaders, feeling the pressure from both the Iguarians and the ruling elites, found themselves increasingly isolated. Their attempts to distance themselves from the Iguarians were seen by many as a betrayal, and their influence began to wane. Meanwhile, the Iguarians, though battered by the attacks, emerged stronger and more unified. They had weathered the storm, but at a cost. The movement was now clearly distinct from the original police protests, with its own goals, leadership, and direction. The break from the OG police leaders was complete, and the Iguarians were determined to prove that they were the true heirs to the fight for justice and change in Muguland. As the dust settled, one thing was clear: the Iguarians were no longer just a movement. They were a force unto themselves, unshackled by the past and ready to forge their own path forward. The ruling elites had succeeded in driving a wedge between the Iguarians and the original police organizers, but in doing so, they had only created a more determined and focused opponent. The battle for the future of Muguland was far from over, and the Iguarians, now fully aware of the challenges they faced, were ready to take it to the next level.